Well, welcome everyone to this next panel of the day. Of course, this is going to be a really important and far-reaching discussion. But before I hand it over to our moderator for today, those of you who are with us, for this panel rather, those of you who were with us at the very beginning of the day will recall that I took special privilege of particularly noting the fact that our moderator for this panel, Adonne Washington, is a product of these efforts. You know, as people who've participated in the IP Social Justice CLE program for its many years, as well as those who've participated in the more recent Microsoft Tech Summit program, are aware of the fact that we oftentimes present these programs and work very closely with Howard Law School. Although we are not a part of the law school and we don't focus only on the law school, as will be evident for those of you who join us for the awards section of this program later today, as you will see that we will acknowledge the efforts of students, not only from Howard, but also from the FAMU College of Law. But I make that point because when Howard students or FAMU students or any students at law schools undertake to work with us at the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice, they do it not as part of any sort of curricular requirement. They do it not because they get any academic credit. They do it as social engineers. They do it as what they see as an opportunity and as a privilege to contribute in the IP space, in the service of the community, in the service of public interest, and in the service of public policy. And that's one of the reasons as to why it is so gratifying today to see that one of the many graduates, if you will, of the work with the Institute to so readily, just so immediately turn right around and to already, fresh out of law school, be doing this type of social engineering, public policy work with public knowledge, which I will let you know she actually began working with them and doing this kind of work before she even graduated. So this is, I think, particularly gratifying to all of us who've been involved with this work for over the past 18 years. 2 years it'll be 20, because we see year after year the results of these efforts as these students are able to participate in these diversity conversations and discussions. They are inspired by the presentations of all of the judges and attorneys and policy makers and policy activists to know that they can go forward and to work in this field in any one of a number of capacities. And we couldn't be more happy to see the fruits of these efforts manifest themselves so immediately and so quickly. And so with that, I will turn the floor over to our moderator, Adonne Washington, and she will introduce her co-panelists and take us into the next panel. So thank you. Adonne?
Thank you, Professor Matima. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I am truly happy to see a lot of faces that I haven't seen in a while, and to be the moderator for this important panel. So this panel is Increasing Investor Diversity, and the panelists come from a varied background, and they're going to discuss the importance of increasing diversity in the inventor space, and what that looks like and where that begins, and how we kind of continue to build a more diverse and inclusive innovation ecosystem. Our first panelist is Mr. Jamal Nelson. He is a patent examiner in the Chemical and Materials Engineering Technology Center at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Mr. Nelson currently serves as the Vice President of the National Society for Black Engineers within the Patent and Trademark Professionals chapter. Prior to working at the USPTO, Mr. Nelson worked as a contract attorney in Washington, D.C. Our next panelist is Sunah Lee, and she is the senior corporate counsel in Microsoft's intellectual property group. Ms. Lee is passionate about inventor diversity and inclusion, and currently is part of a task force team for increasing women inventors at Microsoft. Ms. Lee spent time as a patent attorney prior to joining Microsoft. Our next panelist is Ms. Toni Hickey, and she is the Deputy General Counsel and Chief IP Counsel at Cummins, Inc. At Cummins, she is a member of the CEO-led initiative known as Cummins Advocates for Racial Equity, and as part of this, she leads a cross-functional collaboration team, which includes a focus on increasing diversity in Cummins' inventorship population. And our final panelist is Ms. Valencia Wallace. She is the Deputy Commissioner for Patents at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. She is currently the Executive Lead for the USPTO's new initiative, the National Council for Expanding American Innovation. As part of her 28-year career at the USPTO, Ms. Wallace served as Deputy Commissioner for Patent Quality. And I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us today to have this conversation. And so I would like to say up front, we are going to hold questions until the end, and we have dedicated about 15 minutes to have those questions. So throughout the panel, please send them in, and we will make sure that we get those to the panelists towards the end. And so I'd like to kick off this panel discussion by discussing diversity in inventorship. I have talked with the panelists prior to, and I know that they all come from kind of diverse backgrounds in terms of how they are in their current positions. And I'm hoping to kind of kick off this conversation with Ms. Sunah Lee, again from Microsoft, and hoping that she can discuss what the current state of diversity looks like, and even how diversity may be determined in this space. And then I'll start with you, Ms. Lee, and then pass it off to the rest of the panel.
Thank you. So I would like to start with the Success Act of 2018 and the USPTO reports and studies on it. So let me briefly talk about Success Act. Success Act was enacted in 2018, requires that USPTO provide Congress with a report on publicly available patent data regarding the representation of underrepresented such as women, minorities, and veterans, and make legislative recommendations. And one of the key requirements of this Success Act was identifying publicly available patent data and gathering information on the participation of women, minorities, and veterans in patent and entrepreneurship activity. So its final report to the Congress, USPTO finds that there is a very limited amount of publicly available data regarding the participation rates of women, minorities, and veterans in patent system, mainly because PTO does not collect demographic information from the inventors. And currently, USPTO collects the full name, residence, and mailing address of each inventor patentee. However, even with this limited information, it was not difficult to conclude that women and minorities are underrepresented as an inventors named on US granted patents. The report also noted that the bulk of existing studies and literature mainly focus on women, with a very small number of studies focused on minorities, and also some set of historical information on US veteran inventor patentees. And also it was available to infer the gender of inventor patentees by using a methodology to guess a gender based on the first and last name of the inventor. This methodology is not perfect, but it is believed that the result is quite reliable. So based on this, USPTO did undertake a comprehensive studies focused on women inventor patentees and published a report called Progress and Potential, a Profile of Women Inventors and US Patents. in February 2019. I highly recommend this report. It's very thorough. So in this study, it was found that women comprises 12.1% of all the inventors named on US patents granted in 2016. It sounds a small number, but if you compare this with the number from mid-1980s, which was 5%, so it's a huge jump. And there was a subsequent report on the data in 2020, the woman inventor rate, the share of US inventors receiving patents for women increased from 21% in 2016 to 12.8% in 2019. So there's a 0.7% jump. But unfortunately, there's no similar numbers available for minorities and veterans because there's no way to guess that kind of information from the data collected by the PTO. So it was noted that there is a need for additional information to determine the participation rate for women, minorities, and veterans, and that the report recommends Congress to enhance USPTO authority to gather information about inventors, and suggestion was giving USPTO authority to undertake a voluntary confidential survey of individuals named in patent applications that have been filed with PTO. So if we can see this type of data, it would be a huge impact on efforts in increasing inventor diversity. With that, I will turn it over to other panel members.
So I'll share a little bit also from the point of USPTO, and love to hear from the other panelists as well. Sunah is exactly right that while we have been able to identify more so women and inventors, and particularly of note that the women inventors that are also patent owners seem to generate more in the biotech areas, certainly not in the higher tech areas. So that's another area that we really need to strive to push forward in. But in the areas of people of color or veterans, there really is no legislation right now. I know there's drafts going on, but it's a challenge, it's a struggle to try and identify other underrepresented groups and how to then infiltrate those areas for awareness and education in order to build this more inclusive IP and innovation community. So one area is large companies especially, but all areas, all organizations having to share their data. It is not something that's readily done now. It is not something that they want to do now because they know what the numbers look like. And that's where the rub comes in. We cannot make the more significant changes that we're looking to make if we don't bite the bullet and show where we are now. So that's something that I know Congress has been looking at, but it's very difficult to then square that off with privacy laws, especially for the USPTO in identifying demographic data. There have been studies that while we at the PTO do not agree with and have shown data as to why it was incorrect, but there have been studies that showed that there was some type of a bias based on gender, which we have not found. But that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to pass legislation that will allow us to mandate that certain demographic data is collected in order to move forward. But getting past that legislation, there's pressure that needs to go on large corporations, organizations, universities to share the data that they have on their demographic data in order to move forward. Now, I'll stop there if one of the other panelists would like to share as well.
I'm so sorry. Just briefly, the study, the report done in 2019 is available. It was part of the packet of materials, so I do encourage everyone take a moment to read through that when you have a chance. And I believe, Mr. Nelson, did you want to say something?
I think you might be on mute.
Mr. Sims, there we go. It should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Sims. Alex, thank you. So I was going to say that, it's a visibility issue. I think that, just like Valencia was saying, Ms. Wallace was saying, yeah, we understand the privacy issues, and even working with NSBE-PTO and trying to assert ourselves as trusted voices. The issue is, how are you going to be able to diagnose the issue and how are we going to feel like we're actually being visible and seen as women, minorities, veterans? And so I think one of the conversations that are being had is, how do we use these groups, the social justice group, social engineering, NSBE National, the special interest group, NSBE-PTO on a local level, to actually push this conversation to make sure that the agencies and corporations are actually sharing the data.
Thank you. You all make a very important point about, we can't, as you said, Ms. Martin Wallace, you have to bite the bullet and share the data now. We can't move forward without that empirical data. And so there's no way to really address the diversity without having the numbers. We need to see it. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, no one wants to kind of share that, because when they look at it, they might be kind of concerned about what they have to show. But we can't move forward unless we see that. And so kind of moving on into the next kind of topic, what causes that gap? Where does the gap begin? At what level should we begin to kind of introduce, STEM careers and those paths to individuals, and kind of what differences occur along the line as an individual might want to pursue this career? And I'll start with Ms. Martin Wallace and then pass it to Ms. Hickey.
Absolutely, thank you. So, it's a great question. And we do have within federal government, large corporations, law firms, organizations, in professional organizations as well as nonprofit, great programs for STEM that start in elementary school, and it's a great start. It's introducing our youngest citizens into the field of STEM. But where do we go from there? It's not a one and done type of activity. It's something, just as we go through elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and beyond, to keep developing ourselves and developing our knowledge and skills. You do the same thing to become an inventor, to become an entrepreneur, to become an innovator. So it's great to start in the very beginning with bringing awareness and education to STEM fields across the board. But then we have to, at every stage of a young inventor and innovator's life, we have to keep building. We have to bring in education on entrepreneurship. We have to bring in education on innovation, and each stage. And that's one of the things that USPTO is working on now with the expansion of American innovation, is building the strategy that will go the entire life of an innovator, starting with the introduction at a very young age, at 3 and 4 years old, but then building on that at every stage of that inventor and that innovator's life, in order to then be able to further develop their ideas, further develop their careers, no matter which way they want to go, to address it. And the gap that you were mentioning, the gap comes in more than just demographically, right? It comes geographically, it comes economically as well. You're going to find that in middle America, you're not going to find the same number of inventors, small businesses, high-tech industries, patent owners. as you will in very concentrated areas like Silicon Valley and in certain areas of Texas and other regions. So it's our responsibility, all of us within the IP and innovation community, to then reach out and bring more awareness, more education to those areas so that it doesn't seem like it should be a privilege. It's not a privilege. It's a right of every citizen to understand about innovation, entrepreneurship, inventorship, STEM, and to take advantage, to be able to take advantage and have access to the resources that are going to further develop them. That's what we need to do in this community. It's not a single group or organization's job. It's all of our jobs. It's every teacher, it's every attorney, every scientist. You know, we all should be taking this on as our responsibility to further make everyone aware and educated on this field and how it grows, not only grows for our nation and our economy, but grows for every individual.
I think, Adonne, you were going to turn it to me, and so I've been listening, and I'm not sure where I want to lean in, but because there are so many great opportunities to lean in here and discuss this topic. Going back to the first topic about data and empirical data and asking companies to lean in and provide transparency around their numbers, I agree that that is important. But I want to underscore something that JaMel mentioned, which is this idea around causation. And in particular, as I think about the report that Sunah referenced, the Success Act, I note that one of the challenges that my company has identified in the innovation cycle, in the innovation space, and just in discussing diversity and inclusion is believing that one size fits all. And so what I'm really honored and privileged to be a part of at my company is we have moved the needle very quickly and in an extraordinary way in this space of gender equity. And when we looked up and we decided that we were going to pull the curtains back following the George Floyd incident last year, we realized we hadn't moved the needle in the space of racial equity. And so we decided one size does not fit all. And when I look at the Success Act and when I participate on panels and we have a conflation of, we conflate gender with race, with religion, with underrepresented populations, I think it gets to this issue where we have to decide how we want to tackle these issues and if we can tackle these issues equally. My company, we've launched an initiative that we refer to as Cummins Advocates for Racial Equity, and it is designed to move the needle in the space of Black equity. So we are focused on looking at our inventorship population and determining whether or not we have representation in our inventive population, whether that is our members of our patent committees, whether that is our lead engineers, whether that is those people that are those inventors that are listed as inventors in our filings, whether we have representation that is reflective of the communities in which we live and work. And we have said, no, it is not. And so we are moving, not with deliberate speed, but very quickly to shore up this equity. And so for this audience in particular, because thankfully, Professor Mitima has invited me several times to come and participate. And I think this is one of the few places where I can say, I'd like us to spend time talking about the underrepresented population of African Americans as inventors and talking about in this forum how we can move the needle and bringing more Blacks into the inventive process and talk and focus on all of those phases where we do that. So at my company, we have an early education initiative so that we can try to capture young girls as well as underrepresented populations, as well as Black kids, and encourage them to go into STEM. We have a very robust recruiting strategy with HBCUs that we can encourage engineers to join our organization. And we have a very vigorous retention policy at our company where we try to invest in our Black employees that are involved as engineers, and we highlight them during Black History Month and around and across and during the year, so that we can profile that we do have Blacks that are involved in invention. So I know that's a different way to weigh in on this conversation, and I'm not saying that in any way we should not focus on gender equity and innovation. I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on other underrepresented populations, but I do think that it is interesting to note how African American voices have been suppressed during the inventive cycle over the course of this country's history. And in several other panels, there's been discussions around how violence impacts how African Americans contribute to innovation. And I have a lot of concerns about what is happening now in light of the George Floyd death on whether or not African American inventive activity has been suppressed over the last year, which goes right back to the first topic of where is the empirical data and how are we segmenting how this data is being reported, and can we move the needle in that direction so that we're not conflating everything into a single pot?
Ms. Hickey, I think you bring up some great points. I'll bring in 2 points. One, I think it's important to have those trusted voices when Ms. Martin Wallace talked about reaching out to the whole life cycle of a potential inventor, right? So, and with NSBE-PTO, one of the things that we do is we want to make sure that people who are potential innovators, which is all of us, all citizens, actually are hearing from people who look like them, right? That they're trusted voices, that you can see yourself on the other side. So when you're volunteering for, a STEM fair, right? It's important to see that, oh, he's an adult and he is actually an engineer. I think it's important for all of us to encourage wherever we work, an agency, a corporation, to be those foot soldiers, right? To actually encourage your agency or your corporation to put their resources and actually put those trusted voices in front of the people to make a difference. To the second point with causation, I think, Ms. Hickey, I think you brought up a great point. One of the things I think about from a macro level as an examiner is, what am I examining? What's being prioritized in terms of solutions, right, and problems, right? So if there's a lack of prioritization with Black and brown people's problems, there may be a correlation to those solutions, and then that correlation to those innovators, right? So there are things that, for instance, you may have an entrepreneur, and this is what I want to talk about instead of going through the K through 12 route, but when you're actually practicing, when you're actually a barber, or you didn't go through that formal training, how do you encourage those people to get into the innovative space? They're the ones that are improving things. They may not apply for a patent, right? But in order to get things done as a person of color, you may need to do improvements. So how are we prioritizing these solutions if it's violence, right? How are we doing that and making and being able to find solutions? Is there a way to innovate in that space? And I also think that in order to do that, right, in order to actually change those things, we need to make sure that we're dispelling myths and rumors about the innovative space, right? You don't actually, in terms of prototypes, in terms of actual reduction in practice, constructive reduction, and also being able to provide trusted voices to say, you know what, I don't know how to go through this process. I don't know who to talk to. I don't trust somebody who may not look like me, who maybe not is a person of color or a woman. How are we going to be able to use this innovation space and actually put these resources in front of the people so that we can break that causation, right? We need to prioritize some of the problems that come through from people of color and from women.
I agree with you completely, JaMel, and you could probably speak to more of what NSBE's chapter on PTO is doing to help break that. But it's the question that has to come up. It's a difficult question. It's a difficult conversation, but clearly it's one that is needed and must be had at all points. You can't start solving it if you're not willing to talk about it. And it's something that, kicking or screaming or not, or voluntary, we have to keep those conversations alive as to, okay, why? Let's not hide the fact that there's a group of people, be it by gender or color or what have you, that are being treated differently. Let's identify that they are being treated differently. Let's, have conversations about unconscious bias, which we all have, so that we can now be enlightened to it and not do it, and then move forward as to, okay, now how do we break that channel, that chain?
And Ms. Lee, did you have anything you'd like to add in terms of where the conversation is before we move on to the next topic? I'm sorry, you're on mute.
So the main reason why the big companies cannot share demographic data, especially with respect to inventorship, is because of the company policy, also the privacy issue. But the general D&I report for Microsoft is always public, and it's available if you Google. And if you're interested in, I can share the makeups of engineers. So the Black or African employee represent 49% of Microsoft US workforce, and Hispanic Latino employees represent 6% of workforce, and women actually represents 28%. Yeah, 28% of the US workforce. So this information is available. I think the difficulty is, even the USPTO and the big org has same issue, that there are other kind of legal problems when we disclose this information, or even collecting the information. So we really need to pressure Congress or something to alleviate the issues, so that at least anonymously we can share. I don't know how that to solve the problem, but it's not just the big companies wanted to hide the problems. We like to recognize and the improve. So for woman inventorship, the Microsoft woman inventor rate is 13%, which is the national average. But the technical roles with the woman engineers is 3%. So we really want to emphasize to actually improve the inventorship, woman inventorship. The reason why we focused on is actually because the data is available, and if the data is available, it's easy to use for awareness and easy to use for measurement of improvement. It's not just we want to exclude other underrepresented classes, and myself, people of color, so and women, right? So let the panel know and the audience know that D&I information for big companies usually available publicly.
Thank you. And I'll just, I'll point out a really good couple of points were made, in terms of where the gap kind of begins and how it persists. And I think the geography, economic factors that were mentioned on top of the violence. And I think that's a very interesting correlation, and so I'd actually love to hear more, but to keep this going, I would like to start with Mr. Nelson, as all panelists have kind of mentioned a bit about their current role and what initiatives and what is being done to encourage and increase diversity. And so Mr. Nelson, I'd like to start with you and how NSBE at the USPTO, that affinity group was brought in, and kind of how you see it now and what it's doing.
Well, NSBE-PTO, we're about 8 to 10 years old. We've been increasing our membership greatly over the years. I've been serving as a vice president for 3 years, and we've added 60 members in that time. We had a town hall after the death of George Floyd. I think it really shook everybody to their core, and especially since we were all home during a pandemic, we had to sit there and absorb it. So we realized that even at the patent office that there were things that we are best positioned to use our voices to push our agency. And so one of the things that we did, we had a town hall, we heard feedback from our 200 plus members, and we decided that, we wanted to not only increase inventorship and diversity outside the agency, but we wanted to make sure that we were doing it within our own ranks, right? So we wanted to make sure we had a coaching program that it hit every inflection point with examiners to make sure that they were able to move through our agency and move up into executive and management spaces, because we also know that there is a dragging tail for Blacks and Black examiners moving up. We also are looking at being those foot soldiers and encouraging our agency to get some skin in the game by having a more robust recruitment at HBCUs, not only the universities, but the law schools as well. Because we want to make sure that we're putting people who are diverse into the agency, because we're the preeminent patent office in the world. How much of a priority is that? So we want to make sure that we're hitting North Carolina and the DC and the DMV, and our first stop will actually be in New Orleans to recruit more diverse candidates. We're also have lots of community outreach. Like I said before, we constantly are volunteering for STEM panels and science fairs, and we honestly go to NSBE national conventions and NSBE regional conventions to make sure that you have people who, if you don't know, you can ask somebody, and there are people in this space that look like you. And I know for me now, I was involved with NSBE as a college student, so it's incumbent upon me as a lawyer now and as an examiner at the office to give back. And so I think that it really is a full circle way of saying I was helped with NSBE before. It's my opportunity to give back.
Thank you. And I'll pass it to Ms. Hickey, if you'd like to kind of elaborate a bit more on the work that you've done at Cummins and what diversity initiatives are being done to kind of increase that and what that looks like.
Is there any topic in particular you want me to touch on, or do you want me to just talk in general? So I feel very fortunate to work for an organization where diversity is in our DNA. Way back in the 40s and the 50s, our CEO put a focus on diversity. And actually, there's a lot of many public statements out there by our CEOs that have focused on how we drive inclusivity, an inclusive environment within our organization, as well as in the communities where we live, work, and play. And so as part of that, I had mentioned that we have focused not only on increasing diversity and equity in our technical organization and creating more opportunities for women. I'm proud to say that, our former CTO, she just moved on from being CTO. She was a woman of Fortune 130 company, and she just moved on to become our COO in an industry that doesn't necessarily have a significant large population of women. And we have also now recognized that we need to lean in differently in how we're dealing with racial equity. And so I've mentioned some of this work before, but I will mention that we have been recruiting at 8 historically Black colleges and universities for the better part of the last 15 years. I'm proud to say that I am the recruiting lead for the Howard University team, and I spend a lot of time at the College of Engineering recruiting engineers to join our organization. And then once they join our organization, I spend a lot of time making sure that they are part of those project teams and they're getting the visibility that is necessary for them to be part of the innovation cycle. And I think this is one of those things where we are a technical organization, but we know that there are certain projects and initiatives that are going to result in the development of intellectual property, and there are others that are going to be used for quality and other initiatives in our organization. So it's not enough to find great employees in the STEM fields and to hire them through your recruiting. It's actually to put them in places where they will be contributors to the innovative cycle, and to have them in those rooms, and in particular in our patenting committees, in those rooms where the invention decisions are being made. So when I joined the organization 8 years ago in our company, we have 7 patenting committees. We had 0 diversity leading those committees. And now 2 of those committees are led by African Americans and 1 is led by a woman. And so I do think it is important to think about how we get involved in driving social engineering and having realized impact, having actual impact in the circles and in the work that we touch. And so the work that I touch is supporting the CTO, supporting the technical function, supporting innovative activity at Cummins, and really trying to make sure that there's a voice that is focused on diversity in many of our conversations, whether that involves ensuring that we're funding, like I mentioned, early education programs, which we do significantly in our organization, ensuring that through our intern opportunities that we have a diverse class of interns in our organization, and then ensuring that those interns and other diverse populations are receiving employment opportunities and are part of the innovation cycle. So I'm actually really honored to be a part of the work and be able to exert my influence in some of those spaces. And I just hope that that's an opportunity that when others are in the room that they're doing the same, as I'm sure all of us on the panel are doing, because we all seem to be committed in this space to moving the needle forward.
I think that's a very good point that you mentioned, and JaMel, Mr. Nelson, you also spoke on, was you need someone to look like you, that you feel comfortable asking those questions. And so it sounds like, this kind of mentorship, and even if it's not a formal mentorship, just this ability to look around the workspaces, or to look up to the place that you would like to work, or the space in which you'd like to operate or start your career, and having faces that either resemble yours or can speak to some unique experience for you. And I think you've all kind of shown that is something that your organizations are definitely working towards, and as you said, are all committed to it. And so I would like to pass it over to Ms. Lee, if you'd like to kind of discuss what Microsoft is doing in the diversity space.
Sure. So, because the woman participants data is available, and it can be used for awareness and measurement for improvement. So initially, Microsoft, patent team decided to focus on reducing the gender gap in inventorship. And our hope and belief is that whatever we learn from this effort, hopefully can be also applicable to other underrepresented classes. So what is Microsoft doing to improve women inventorship? There are several projects we have undertaken. Microsoft is a huge organization. We have 150,000 employees, supported by 33 patent attorneys. So first, our team created an internal task force that is tasked with understanding the problem and developing the tool to help our patent attorneys and paralegals address this concern on a client-by-client basis. And we started raising awareness by within the patent group and also intellectual property group by sharing data and presenting IPO toolkit. And we prepare sample presentation decks that can be used to educate clients, so that each attorney doesn't have to spend time to create their own deck. Consistency when messaging the topic. And we also create an internal dashboard so each attorney can use to break down their woman inventorship rate by client group. We use the whiteboard gender tool applied to USPTO public data. And we also reach out to our outside counsel because we wanted to raise awareness with outside counsel about the issue. And so we had a series of presentations for them on this topic, because in many cases, our OCs are frontline folks to talk with inventors. So we asked them, to help specifically on patent process and inventorship issue. So during the disclosure meeting, we asked that OC make sure everybody in the room understand the process, and we asked them that OC explain and probe on inventorship every single time, so to ensure the accuracy of inventorship. And we asked them to step diverse teams because all the panel pointed out, we believe that seeing a diverse set of attorneys can help diverse inventors feel more comfortable and empowered. Microsoft is all up has been working hard to create culture of inclusion, and this inclusive culture help us, especially the task force team, push forward our initiatives and get management and individual buy-in about them. I share the data, woman inventorship data and the DNI report data previously, so I'll close my remarks here.
Thank you. And then Ms. Martin Wallace, I'd like to pass it to you. And I'd love for you to speak on the National Council for Expanding American Innovation. If you could, that initiative, if you could
Yes.
speak on that.
Thank you very much. So yes, we started this last year based on the Success Act report that came out that identified certain initiatives where the beginning start with the actual council. So our council is made up of CEOs of large corporations, university presidents, executives within the federal government. The Secretary of Commerce serves as the chair. But we also have independent inventors, small business owners. We have nonprofit organizations and professional organizations as well. Because the whole point of this council is to have a diverse opinion, diverse ideas in order to get to the best solutions as to how do we become a more inclusive ecosystem as innovators, as inventors, as entrepreneurs. So that's where we started. We had our inaugural meeting last September of the council. And the council really is that giant beacon of light, really, that draws attention to the problem. That's only the beginning. What we're doing at the PTO with support and assistance from the council is developing the national strategy that, as was mentioned before, goes through the entire lifespan of an inventor innovator in order to give them the appropriate assistance, awareness, education to really grow within and stay within the innovation ecosystem. So that's one of the things that we're doing. I'm actually also very proud to say that we have a working group sitting under the council, and that Cummins is a member of our working group and is partnering with us and fighting this fight, not only for building this strategy, but also sharing with each other, partnering each other with initiatives such as what Toni was mentioning to us earlier. And we're doing that with all of our working group members to not only help us build a strategy, but share all of your initiatives, all of your successes. How do we partner together? Because there are many great initiatives out there. But when we start collaborating and working together, that's when we find the impact that we're looking for to move that needle. Going from 5% as we were a couple decades ago to 12% for women is fantastic, but that's only the beginning. How do we then make the impact that we will not only feel today, but that will grow the strong roots that will keep blooming long after all of us are no longer part of the IP community, that it's going to keep growing, and that someday panels and conferences don't ever have to use the term underrepresented when they're talking about women, any person of color, because the opportunities, the access, the education is there to do and be whatever you want to be. And that's part of what the strategy is doing with the help of our working group members, is building a strategy that is not just a one and done, but that we will keep growing and moving forward with, so that we can eradicate the term underrepresented.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Alex Sims, I would like to open the floor for any questions to the panelists at this time.
Right, so, okay. There are no questions in the chat right now, but anyone feel free to jump in. It's been a great discussion so far, so I guess a round of applause for all of our panelists. It's been great. But we want to hear your questions as well. You know, we have a lot of people here, so feel free, and I'll read your question out loud to the panelists. Don't be shy. We want to hear your voices. Somebody has a question. I know somebody.
Well, Alex, while the questions are coming in, perhaps, you know, we were able to chat amongst ourselves before preparing for this, and I think one of the points that that really drove home is, if you really were thinking about how can I make a difference, right? How can I, you know, push the needle, or I'm afraid to speak up in my agency or my corporation or my university, hopefully listening to this panel encourages you to put that foot forward, to make that difference, to speak up, and now was the time.
I agree completely with you, JaMel, and that's a great point. You can't be heard if you don't use your voice. So you have to set forth, such as what NSBE did at USPTO, had a voice and used the voice to say, we want to make a difference. In fact, what I was mentioning, Cummins is on our working group. While there were a great number of people wanted to be on it, we wanted to be part of working on this with Cummins because they've had such success, right? And part of that is because Toni said, which she and I worked together years ago, and it's great to see her. She said, you know what? Cummins is going to be on your working group. Let us in. We're doing this. Use your voice. Make sure you're heard, because we want to hear from you. We can't make that difference until we hear from you.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And I see we got a couple things coming up in the chat. The first question I see from Timothy Buckley says, how have you dealt with pushback to diversity initiatives within your engineering community and leadership?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And you know what? I'm going to be the first to answer in my experience as an examiner, as an engineer, as a lawyer. You can't stop. And in fact, I had a conversation earlier today with JaMel as we were talking that, you know, you have to keep pushing. It doesn't matter if you're getting pushback against you. You have to keep using your voice. If you have a good product, then it will happen. Maybe not as fast as we wanted to, but you keep pushing and you keep sustaining, and then you break down those walls. It's had to happen. I mean, we have a long way to go, but if I look back to my career at the USPTO and where I started, and did I even have the idea at that time that I would be a deputy commissioner at the top of this agency? And I would have said the answer is no, because as we said before, you have to see people who look like you, and none of them were there. And, you know, we have slight setbacks as women, as people of color, but you keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I would echo that. I agree with Valencia 100%. You are going to meet resistance in this work every day, and you keep pushing because eventually someone is going to open the door. I think that's 50% of it. The other half is to remember to support those that are doing the work. So as soon as I heard that Valencia was at the head of the council, I said, I'm there, because I've worked with her. I know she's a leader. I know that she's dedicated to this work. And I knew that being in the room would help her move the ball forward on behalf of the agency. And so sometimes you have to be the person who's knocking and pushing the door down. And then sometimes you have to be the person that's right behind the person who's pushing the door and helping them propel it forward. And I think that's really the only way that we're going to move the ball forward, because it just takes a level of tenacity and commitment, and the door is going to be closed constantly. And the other thing is that I try to keep in mind is I try to meet people where they are. And in the technical community at my organization, showing them data matters. So going into the room and being able to actually point to data that reflects that inventorship populations, that there's suppression going on, showing them data that we don't have representative numbers on our patenting committees, or we don't have representative numbers in our teams that we have dedicated to high priority or visible projects. I go in with data because that seems to be the language that influences them. And so I say meet people where they are and try to persuade them based on how they're receptive to receiving information.
Okay, so I see we have one more question in the chat. Anna, do you want to take that one?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, sure.
So the next question is, how can we identify concrete deliverables for traditional civil rights organizations that may be able to assist in educating communities, identifying prospective candidates, and the like?
So I'll start that one as well. That's one of the things that we're doing with this strategy. It's identifying programs. It's identifying how to go forward with putting them in place. And something that we've all talked about here is, how do you now measure whether they're successful or not? And the measurement part is measuring yourself. And I know it's a big challenge across board, but this is one of the things that Toni was saying, right? And Sunah as well, is that, well, we had to look at ourselves. What do we look like to be able to identify where we need to go? So putting those assessments in place, and whether you're starting with, I won't name the company, we probably know what it is, where you probably have, in equipment where you won't find women anywhere within their corporation, right? Starting there, or you're starting at the top where you've met huge success like in Cummins and Microsoft, knowing where you are now and plotting for yourself those incremental measures to move forward, not allowing yourself to slide back, but always moving forward. And as I mentioned, that's one of the things that we're doing with the strategy, is trying to identify those deliverables and how to measure your success within it.
Well, if we have time, I see one more question. I know we're right on the edge of time here, but one more. You guys think we can go one more? Okay, so this one comes from Charlie Bingham. It says, how can we make inventing cool for the next generation to encourage more minorities to think about capitalizing off of the system?
Well, I'm struggling to answer that one because I already think that inventing is cool. So I'm not sure how to go after that. Other than I will say that I've really been heartened in seeing how many outreach programs there are in STEM that try to speak to the interests of both kids and college students, and even, I think, like JaMel had mentioned, when you start talking about entrepreneurs. And I think it's more about helping people understand how significant science and engineering have been to the development of humankind. And I think, like, right now, being able to talk about issues related to social justice and COVID and the vaccine and accessibility and compulsory licensing and all of those things, I just say use your platform to try to energize people based on what you've experienced in your own practice. So I'm struggling. I think it's a great question, but I get so jazzed up about this that I'm not sure, and other people around me aren't jazzed up. I try to share that energy through things that I've experienced around the world.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll just say to that point, Toni, the energy that you just answered that question with, I think that also answers the question, right? So when we have these discussions and you come to the table and you're speaking about inventorship and making it cool, if you bring that energy and you bring the dedication to have these conversations, already right there, you're light years ahead, kind of, in terms of making it cool and making those on the other end of that conversation want to learn more about it.
And I'll agree with both of you. I think it's cool myself. That's why I'm in this field, right? But something I've seen, like some tournaments I've seen, like robotics tournaments, the Legos and the first, and to see kids when all you have to do is bring it to them, right? And let them sit there and let them use their minds to be creative. That energy that you saw from Toni is the same energy that I see. It's just the awareness. It's bringing it to them. It's making sure that they have the appropriate access and they understand why it's so cool. Now, after that, you have to also explain to them why it's lucrative.
I'm going to hop in because I literally have 1% and I'm going to die. So if you.
Uh-oh, I think we lost him anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you to the few of you that asked a couple of questions. We appreciate that. And I'd like to thank our panelists, and I'm sure we'll get around to the other panelists as well, for taking the time to be here and to share your insight on this very important topic. And Professor Mitima, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Well, thank you. That, of course, was not only just an excellent panel in its own right, but it was such an appropriate way to end the panel presentations for this first day, right? Because I think that, the key takeaway point from all of your wonderful comments and observations is that concrete efforts produce concrete results, right? Thinking about this in the abstract, talking about it, generalizing, wishing that, how we would say back in my family, diversity soon come, that's not going to get us there, right? It is particular concrete efforts. And also, the point that you made, Toni, about meeting people where they are and showing them data, right? And, the flip side to that is not only showing them the impacts, but showing them how this negatively impacts them, how this negatively impacts the goals of the company, and indeed how this negatively impacts the goals of our national IP and innovation policy, right? It's not just these marginalized communities that are losing out. It is our society that's losing out as a whole. And so this was absolutely